Welcome to assignment 17. These are notes on solving quadratic equations. So go ahead and set up your header. I'm on page 28. Okay, so the first thing you're probably wondering is, what is a quadratic equation? If we're going to be solving them, we've got to know what they are. So what's a quadratic equation? It's an equation that has the variable squared. The variable, what does squared mean? To the power of 2. Okay, so in every equation we see, the variable is going to be taken to the power of 2. And we need to have some special strategies to solve them because it's not as simple as just getting x by itself using the tools we already have. So we need some new tools. So just really quick, let's just make sure we're clear on what kind of equations we're talking about, right? So this is an example of a quadratic equation. Here, the x is squared. Okay, sometimes there's like something with the x, like this, and in parentheses, that's squared. This is a quadratic equation. Okay, this is a quadratic equation too, and this is actually, this last example that I'm writing is actually a quadratic equation in vertex form, which we're not going to spend too much time on this year, but it's a really big deal in Algebra 2, and so we want to know how to solve an equation that looks like this. And this particular kind of format of an equation is called vertex form. Okay, so just to be clear, right, so these are examples of quadratic equations. And then there are some things that are not quadratic equations, so the strategies that we use only work. The strategies that we're going to learn right now, they only work on quadratic equations, so they don't work on an equation like this, right? Here, the variable is not squared, it's being multiplied by 2. This is not a power of 2. Okay, these strategies won't work if it's, say, cubed, like this, where it's to the power of 3. Or if there's, you know, a power of 4. These are all not quadratic equations. These are non-examples, okay? So the strategies that we learned today are only for when we have something like this, where the variable, where something is squared, right? Some part of the equation that has a variable in it is squared. Okay, so we are going to start with, we're going to call it level 1 of these kinds of equations. And we're going to take a look at level 1 here in this video, and then in the next assignment, you'll get into level 2 and level 3. Okay, so level 1 is an equation like this. X squared equals 16. Okay, now, with no strategy at all, you could figure out what x equals, right? Because you say, okay, well, x squared equals, that means x times x equals 16. So a number times a number equals 16. What number times that same number equals 16? And you might think, well, 4 times 4, that equals 16. So x equals 4. And here's the thing, this thought might pop into your head that, you know what? There's another possibility. Because look, negative 4 times negative 4 also equals 16. So actually, x could be equal to 4, because 4 times 4 is 16, 4 squared. Or x could be equal to negative 4, because negative 4 times negative 4, negative 4 squared, also equals 16. So you can come up with the answer kind of just by thinking through that it's 4 and negative 4, and those are the correct answers. But here's the strategy that we're going to use, because the strategy that we're going to establish in level 1, we're going to be able to use moving forward as well. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take this equation, and I'm going to do the same thing to both sides of it. Watch what I'm going to do to both sides of it. I'm going to square root both sides. Why? Why am I square rooting both sides? Because square root and squared are inverse operations. They undo each other. So when I'm solving an equation, I'm always trying to undo, okay, whatever's happening to the x, let me undo it. So right now, what's happening to the x? It's being squared. So I'm going to undo it by square rooting. Now, if I do something to one side of the equation, I, of course, have to do it to the other side of the equation. And so I take the square root of 16, and listen, here is what I get. I get plus or minus 4. Okay, the square root of 16, normally we're used to saying, oh, the square root of 16 is 4. But in reality, the square root of 16 could also be negative 4, because negative 4 times negative 4 equals 16. Positive 4 times positive 4 equals 16. Okay, now in edge elastic, be careful. So this, you can just write it like if we were just in paper, you could just write it like this. In edge elastic, it's going to ask you like this. It's going to ask you for the lesser x and the greater x. Okay, and this is just like the limitation of learning on a computer, right? A lesser x is, in this case, is going to be -4, and the greater x will be +4. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Let's say I have x squared equals 100. I say, okay, I want to get x by itself. Oh, it's being squared. So let me do the opposite of squaring. I'm going to square root both sides. Okay, and normally you could just put the square root right at the top line. I'm writing it as a separate line so you kind of have it and you can see the progression in your notes. So when I square root, so look, when I have this x is squared and square rooted, then I just end up with x. These two things, the square root and the squared, they cancel each other out. Okay, just like the same as like adding 3 and subtracting 3 cancel each other, square root and squared cancel each other. So I'm just left with x. And what's the square root of 100? It's plus or minus 10, right? X could be -10, because -10 times -10 is 100, or +10. +10 times +10 is 100, right? So in this case, in Edge Elastic, you would be asked for the lesser x, and you'd put -10, right? And you'd be asked for the greater x, and you'd put +10. Now, on your paper, you can just write this, right? On your paper, you can just write this, and then when you get into Edge Elastic, yeah, you're going to have to, spread it up. Okay? So listen, I'm going to have you copy as a reference, just because it's so nice to not have to think through every single step of a problem, right? Like if I'm thinking through this problem, I have to think, okay, I'm going to square root both sides, and then this becomes x by itself, and then this becomes, oh, what's the square root of 144, right? And maybe you remember it's plus or minus 12, okay? Maybe you remember that. But what I'm going to have you do right now is just super fast copy all these down. The square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. The square root of 4 is plus or minus 2, okay? The square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. Okay, and I'm just going to have you copy this right here, and then that way you can kind of take like a step out, right? So next time you see something like this, square root of 16, even if you're like, oh, I'm blanking, you just come and be like, oh yeah, it's plus or minus 4. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead up to 12. The square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. The square root of 36 is plus or minus 6. See if you could beat me. The square root of 49, square root of 64. 81. Okay, and notice I'm just putting this in my notebook. If you were sitting in front of me, I would just give it to you. Right, but it's going to be really nice for you to have this. As we get into more complicated equations, it's going to be nice for you to take this kind of step out for yourself. Okay, so once you have that set up, you're going to go shift over to the next page, which is page 29. You're going to start assignment 18 on page 29. Okay, so right now you're just going to set up your first 6 practice problems. 1, 2, 3, skip 3 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now there's no practice problems to do right now. You're going to go ahead and just submit a picture of this page, okay, page 28. But that way, when you're ready to start assignment 18, you'll just go ahead and do your first 6 problems right there. Okay, and you're all set for assignment 17.